Our job is to provide the tools to make intelligent decisions. Before somebody called with a problem about the chicken, you would send it to the diagnostic lab. Nowadays, I have to ask the people, does the chicken have a name? They were more personally involved in their birds, so they're very concerned.
Welcome to Unplugged, the official podcast of the Poultry Science Association. This is the podcast where we strip away the fluff and get real about poultry science from bench to barn. I'm your host, Andy Vance, Executive Director of the Poultry Science Association. One of my favorite things to talk about is the land-grant mission of the land-grant university system. I think it's the backbone of the modern agriculture industry that has made U.S. farming, agriculture, poultry, and livestock production the envy of the world. And one of the key components of that land-grant system is university extension. That's the topic of this week's episode. And our guest is Dr. Tony Pescatore, a longtime leader in university extension focused in poultry, one of the preeminent educators in the space, freshly retired from the University of Kentucky as extension professor and associate chair of the department at UK. Tony spent decades advancing the mission of land-grant research, teaching, and extension, connecting that research to real-world impact. From his first PSA presentation as a graduate student to serving as president of our association, Tony's career reflects a deep dedication to service, science, and mentorship. Tony, how did you get involved in extension, and what drew you to that aspect of faculty life when you were getting your start?
Well, I was very fortunate. I went to two universities, Michigan State and Texas A&M, that had a long history of a strong extension program. In my graduate studies at Michigan State, I was housed in the office suite of the extension faculty. So I got to see them every day of what they were doing, and it intrigued me, and it caused me to want to work in that area. And then I went to Texas A&M for my PhD, and there was mentors down there that had strong extension programs as well.
When you think about extension, or how do you explain extension to the person who's uninitiated?
The first thing that happened was the Morrill Act in 1862, which created the land-grant system, gave the states the ability to create a university. The next thing that happened was the Hatch Act, which gave them money to do research. And then the next thing was the Smith-Lever Act, which was later on, which where the government and the universities decided that they had a bank of knowledge and they had to disseminate that knowledge. They call it the cooperative extension because it's the cooperation between the federal government, the Department of Agriculture, and the land-grant universities, and even the local communities. So it's the outreach of the universities.
I heard it described one time as taking the university to the people, and I always thought that was a good little capsule or a nugget to help you remember. Going back to your personal path, you talked about that first exposure in East Lansing and then really getting great mentorship as you were doing your PhD program. What was your first role or extension experience then as an extension professional, and what do you remember most about that early role as a professional?
The first or second day that I was on the job at the University of Kentucky, I got a phone call, and it was an older gentleman who called, and he had a whole series of list of questions about his flock. And I went through it with him and answered his questions on nutrition and management and husbandry and all those things. And at the end of the conversation, he just told me who he was. He was the president of the Kentucky Senate, who was a poultry breeder, and he just wanted to see what kind of person the University of Kentucky hired.
That's amazing.
So I must have did okay because I kept that job for 40 years.
Yeah, apparently that first day, you thought you were done with school, you weren't going to get tested anymore, and your second day on the job, you get a pretty big exam. That's wild. You don't think about one of the chairs of the legislature picking up the phone just to see if the new extension guy knows what he's talking about. What was extension like in those days? You know, how illustrative of the kinds of conversations you were having with growers and producers was that conversation from a key legislator? Was that a typical conversation you'd get from a producer in those days?
Well, when you talk about poultry extension, you have a whole host of clientele. You have the small flock producer has just a backyard flock of chickens, and you have CEOs of major corporations. So you have this wide range of people you have to deal with, whether it's the service people at the integrators or it's the one person that has a chicken that's not doing well. So all those things are what you address. And over time, the thing that's changed is technology.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my question was, as you look at a 40-year career at the university there, what are the changes you've seen over those decades? Technology clearly is a big piece. How did that change the way you did your job in extension from the early 80s on through to 2024 when you're thinking about hanging up your spurs?
Well, the gold standard when I started out in this career was a refereed publication that addressed an issue. So if you go back and look at the libraries of any of the land grants, there were publications that were produced, paper on paper, and that was the gold standard. You know, you were measured by how many refereed publications in regards to different issues were out there. The other was also, as you said, bringing the information to the people. So county meetings was a major thing that was occurring out. I spent a lot of time on the road driving to county meetings and holding meetings in person. So you had those two things. You had the hard publication and you had county meetings. Now with technology, you have Zoom meetings, you can publish very simply online. People have access to all kinds of information. So that in itself has, you've seen a drop in county meetings, you've seen a drop in that hard publication, because when you talk about a publication back then, it had to not only be refereed, but then it had to go to editing, it had to go to typesetting. It was a long thing before you got your publication out. Today, you can write a publication and put information online very quickly.
Yeah, the rapid pace of change or the ability to get information out there. I'm just guessing, not having, ever worked in extension personally, that has put a different kind of pressure on today's extension experts, that you've got to turn out a lot of content or a lot of information because the customers expect to be able to just go and click a few places online and get it. Am I guessing that correctly? Or how have those pressures, I guess, from the days when you were doing those refereed publications and going through that lengthy publication process to this more instantaneous form of communication we see today?
You've moved away from being reactive to being proactive. A good expansion specialist now can look down the road and say, we need information on this because this is going to become an issue. So that the movement from reaction to proaction is what really is occurring. The other thing is you have a widespread audience now. You have people from all over the world that are signing up to do it. So your impact goes beyond the border of your state to the whole world now.
Yeah, you're no longer just talking within a couple hundred miles of Lexington in your case. You might not know where they're coming from. And looking at the kinds of topics or challenges that you're addressing, how's that different today from the kinds of problems you were helping your clientele solve in the early 80s and 90s?
In the early 80s, you really had two populations you were dealing with. You were dealing with the very small producers that were the backyard flocks or the, 100, maybe 100 birds, and you had the large corporations. Today, when you look at what's happening to the industry as poultry in general, you still have those two populations, but we now have a medium-sized farm, people that have anywhere from 3,000 to maybe 10,000 birds that are the medium producers. And those had disappeared when I first started into extension, and now they're reappearing. And that is a audience that needs a lot of technical support because they don't have the support structure of the large integrators or have the immediate needs of like the small flock producer.
I'm also wondering, Tony, thinking about that smaller scale producer, even in the little town where I live, it seems like half my neighbors have 3 to 5 hens in the backyard. Maybe it was a byproduct of COVID or whatnot, but it seemed like there was this resurgence of interest in backyard chicken. Kind of took me back 100 years, right, to where everybody was gathering their own eggs, sort of thing. Have you seen that as adding, an additional dimension of demand on extension poultry expertise?
Yes, that area has exploded. There's two things that happened. COVID happened, and also there's a movement on to know where your food comes from. And chickens are a very easy way to get into food production or producing your own meat, things of that nature. So you see a lot of that happening. Now, one of the things I say is before you used to talk about somebody called with a problem about the chicken, you would send it to the diagnostic lab and get things. Nowadays, I usually have to ask the people, does the chicken have a name?
Yeah.
So if they were more personally involved in their bird, so they're very concerned.
Mm.
Now, in response to that, what we're lacking is a lot of veterinarians that would work with the small flock producers. So one of the things that we have done at the University of Kentucky in cooperation with Michigan State and Utah State is we put an online course together for non-poultry veterinarians so that they can get continuing education and go through a online course that could teach them about poultry so they feel more comfortable working with their clientele. So that's just an example of identifying a need and trying to fill that need with new technology or being able to meet the clientele's need.
Thinking back to the other categories that you highlighted, maybe those medium-sized producers or the integrators, what are you seeing today as the way, if you were giving advice to extension professionals listening to this, maybe younger mid-career folks, the way that you find collaboration works best between researchers, producers, and extension professionals? What's been your experience of how we can best collaborate through all those different pieces of our community?
The role of everyone is to identify the problems, and the problems have become more complex than ever before. So you need a more complex solution than was required. You just don't need, add calcium to the diet. You go everything from what the bird needs to what the environmental impact is. How do you produce quality feed? All those things take things. So you have to bring in a whole team of people to collaborate. Now, what we've seen with granting agencies is that they now include an outreach portion on their grant. Not only are they wanting new information, they wanted you to tell them how you're going to disseminate that information to the clientele.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that presents some opportunities for us in extension, certainly. But I'm glad that you mentioned funding because I'm, thinking about shifts in funding, technology, public perception. How do you see land grant institutions continuing to demonstrate the value of extension? And what concerns or opportunities do you see there about how we do that as all of these pressures on the university system at large come to bear?
Well, actually, you're seeing a trend at the universities now. Traditionally, extension was agriculture, it was foods, nutrition, that type of subject matter. What you're seeing now is the universities have created administrative positions that are extension and outreach. So they're actually looking now for outreach from their other components of a university. So right now, many universities outreach, we don't use the term extension as much anymore, but outreach has become a major component of their service to their audience.
Hmm. And with that in mind, looking at that shift maybe in terminology or lingo or focus, how do you define a successful extension program today? Or what do you see as these are the hallmarks or benchmarks of a successful extension program in this modern era?
The way I look at extension, our job is to provide our clientele with the tools that they need to make intelligent decisions. So what you're really looking at is not only are you packaging the information to be disseminated, but once it's disseminated, What is the impact you made?
Hmm.
So and that's the area that's changing the most is what is accountability? What is impact? How do you measure impact? And the problem is that if you're sitting there and you say, did you make an impact? But that's something 3 or 4 years down the line. Are you changing behaviors because of what you've done? And that's the key point is how do you get a perception of what the change was?
Yeah, great insight there. As I mentioned, you're kind of one of our preeminent experts in extension. So you've had the opportunity over the years to mentor, countless students and fellow professionals who've come into extension or the university system. If you were talking to someone, as you did last fall at our professional development conference, who's maybe just getting started in extension or considering a role in extension, what advice would you give a young person getting started in the profession today?
If you're going to work in a career in extension, the first thing is you need a signature program. What is an issue that you feel comfortable with that you can make an impact? Concentrate on that, become the expert in that area, and deliver programs that people want in that area. It's focusing in the early part of your career. As you get to be more seasoned, you can have a wider breadth. But in the beginning, you have to have a signature program.
How did you do that when you were getting started? Like, how did you find your signature program or, hey, this is the thing that Tony is the foremost expert in?
Well, it became a thing of opportunity. When I moved to Kentucky, I had a lot of experience from where I was. I was at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore before that, so I had a lot of exposure to industry. And when I moved to Kentucky, that was the time that the industry wanted to expand. So I was able to, because of my background in both poultry and business, I was able to interact with a lot of the poultry companies and to sell the state as a site for poultry expansion. Part of it was because I was an expertise. I was able to meet with the government officials, educate them on the potential benefits of having poultry in your state. So I became an expert on the expansion of poultry and what a community needed to do to expand poultry. And that included everything from government relations, siting guidelines, things of that nature. It was a very interesting career because the opportunity just happened, but it expanded greatly. And we went from about $125 million industry to a $1.2 billion industry in a matter of years.
I was going to ask you if you didn't mention the data, because that was one of those things when we were hearing folks talk about your career and share Tony Pescatore stories at your retirement last fall. That was the thing that blew my mind is the difference in Kentucky's poultry industry from the beginning of your career to the end and the not insignificant role you played in that. What are some of the lessons you learned along kind of that journey that you would impart to folks who are trying to find their signature program and build that program over, a 10, 15-year period of their early and middle career?
The big thing is, what are you good at? What do you think is a real problem? And I think that's one of the things that people think they need to know everything right off the bat. And they also want to teach their PhD, whatever
Right,
their topic was.
right.
One of the things that helped me getting started is what I used to call ride alongs. I made time to go visit industry, get in the car with the serviceman and ride his route for the day. And it's amazing as you're driving around visiting farms that you'll see what's happening and what can be different. So that's the thing is to be able to go out, talk to people about what they're seeing, and they will open up to you and say, "Oh, we got this problem, we have this problem," or "I wish we had something on this."
I'm glad you mentioned the ride-alongs. One of my closest collaborators in my role at PSA has been Brian Fairchild, a fellow extension professional who I know holds you in the highest regard. And it seems like most of the time I'm talking to Brian, he's in the truck doing a lot like what you're talking about, going out to talk with producers or to be, in the barn somewhere. What I'm wondering about, and because I know Brian would echo what you're saying, I'm wondering if the younger or newer folks getting an extension, given all the pressures that you have inherent in the university system or those technological things we were talking about earlier. Do today's extension professionals have the time or know to make the time to go and do those kind of ride-alongs that you're talking about, given how fast-paced everything is today in this technologically driven world?
There are no longer any 100% extension positions at universities. If there is one, it's very rare. You have seen the extension faculty across the country at almost every university become the instructor in the management classes. Myself, Brian, every one of us has gone into an instruction because that expertise is what we have. When you sign up to teach a course, you're on a time schedule.
Yeah.
That's the one that zapped a lot of the extension expertise time away, is being the instructor. Now, is it a good thing for the students? It's a great thing for the students. They're having people that understand the industry teach them about the industry. But at the same time, that time you're in the classroom at classroom prep is time you cannot be out in industry. The other thing that has changed is that with avian influenza,
Yeah.
you have now increased the biosecurity of these farms. So the time lag between the time you can be exposed to poultry to the time you can get on a farm has increased. So what used to be, maybe 2 visits, 3 visits a week, yet you could go to a farm, you're now there with maybe 1 visit a week. So even that has taken our road time away.
Yeah. Maybe some of the technologies we've been talking about will help facilitate that you can get in the barns without being in the barns, but it's a huge challenge, no doubt. Tony, thinking about all of the different hats that the extension professional wears, we've talked about the teaching component. Obviously, the outreach is maybe the part that we think about the most. The other piece about extension that I love as a kid who came up through 4-H is the role that we play in youth development. I know you have been personally very involved in that, in trying to get the next generation, so to speak, interested in poultry. I wonder if you might share a little bit about your passion and experience in youth development through the lens of poultry extension.
When you look at poultry extension, one of the important components that we deal with is the youth development and the youth programs through whether it's 4-H or FFA. We have a presence of our poultry extension people in those programs. So many all of our states have active 4-H programs, and that includes everything from chick development projects in the schools. It involves the judging contest, the food the things such as chicken barbecue, turkey barbecue, the egg preparation contest. All those things help develop students because we give them an opportunity to learn how to communicate, how to make decisions, and how to present themselves. And those are skills that are very important as they develop. And if you talk to extension people throughout the states or the country, you will see that the proudest thing they are is when they see students come from a little 9-year-old to being leaders in their community. So that's a very important thing. And we have expertise in developing programs and delivering those programs that develop youth at a very early age.
Yeah, I love that, Tony. And I'm thinking, when you're talking about some of those chick development programs, I'm going back to when my own daughter was, in second, third grade, and the teacher in science class brought in some eggs in an incubator for them to hatch that they'd worked with county extension professional to find a grower that would able, set them up. And that was, an opportunity for those kids, many of whom had never been on a farm or may never be on a farm, to learn about, hey, this is a piece of animal husbandry. It's really valuable in, thinking about the 4-H component. I want to give, you and your colleagues at UK a lot of credit. You guys host a tremendous conference every year for the 4-H folks, the 4-H poultry conference every fall. How did you get so integrally involved in that aspect of extension from an early age? Was that just something that was expected at UK, or is that a personal passion of yours?
It was something that was expected, but it became a passion. There's nothing better than seeing your successful people develop. You see these kids that are 9 years old and they became leaders in their community. And that was, you talked a little bit about my retirement, but that meant the most to me is when the 4-H agents showed up to support me. As I go throughout the state, you see somebody that you remember them as a child. And it's just, that means a lot. And just as an example, I've done a chick incubation in a school for 35 years, same school. And when they did a thing, what's the most important thing you remember? The chick incubation became the third highest thing they remembered when they did their centennial. So, I mean, you make an impact because they can see something different than they would ever see before. But as I say, is giving them the opportunity to be successful and to teach them to communicate and to make decisions is what's the basis of all our youth programs.
Tony, as we kind of wrap up our time together and what's been a real fun conversation for me, I always like to ask what I call the crystal ball question. So get out your crystal ball, look 5-10 years into the future. How do you see extension continuing to develop and evolve? What are things that you're either excited about the future of extension, or concerns you have about the future of extension?
From extension side of point, there's always going to be need for the outreach. How that takes place is going to be very different. I think as you move away from people gathering, you need to make sure you're developing quality programs that they want to take part in. And I think that skills in presentation, skills in formatting information is going to be different. The other thing that's coming online is you're going to have AI come on. You can generate information. And that's really a dangerous thing because we have always based extension on research-based information. And when we got to the internet, we were filtering information for people. That's going to be even more as we go down that road.
I was watching a medical program and somebody referred to it as Dr. Google. And I'm thinking, this is the Dr. Google's only going to become a bigger problem in the era of AI, in this case, artificial intelligence, that you're going to be swatting. Well, ChatGPT told me X. How do you, as an extension professional, navigate that when you have clientele who come to you that maybe are simultaneously unaware, but also have all of this information at their fingertips that, well, I read it online, so it must be true?
I've seen more of that when I deal with small flock producers. They've gone on to the line. They have self-diagnosed their problem.
Right.
And it's trying to explain that, yeah, maybe that is some of the same symptoms or whatever. It's hard to filter the information. Or we have these chicken gurus or whisperers that are telling people things. And it's like, no, that's not the best thing for your birds, or that's not necessary, or just simple things like nutrition. Chickens eat chicken feed. That's what they need, and filtering out the bad information.
Tony, I appreciate your expertise and appreciate your many, many contributions to the Poultry Science Association. As I was reading your CV and, of course, mentioned at the top of the program, you're past president of our association, but the number of committees, boards, task forces, blue ribbon panels that you have chaired or participated in, the number of publications that you've had, awards that you've won, and I was really tickled that we were able to celebrate with you as the first ever honoree of the Poultry Science Association James Denton Distinguished Service Award for your long record of contributions to the community and to the association. Thank you for contributing still in this way by joining us on our podcast. Friends, we are just a week away from the PSA annual meeting and North American Scientific Conference. We'll see you next week in Raleigh, North Carolina. Very much looking forward to being with you in Raleigh. It's going to be a great meeting, one of our best yet, tremendous scientific program. If you are in Raleigh, stop by and say hi. I would love to shake hands with you and get your feedback on how you're enjoying the podcast. If you've got future topics you'd like for us to cover, or experts like Tony you'd like to hear us interview, drop by and say hello next week in Raleigh. And for more information about all of our meetings and events, including our Pacific Rim Scientific Conference this October in Macau, or our PSA Pathways Summit also in October, but in Minneapolis, you can find those on the Meetings and Events tab at poultryscience.org. Until next week, for Unplugged and the Poultry Science Association, I'm Andy Vance.